Welcome to Smash Avo Property. Today I'm speaking with the founder and CEO of RipeHouse Advisory, Jacob Field. RipeHouse Advisory generate fantastic research and reporting, among a number of other things to professionals in the property industry. One to mention of late is the Covid-19 vs Australian Property Report, which many well-renowned property experts participated in. And we get some insights into how they're feeling about the current environment. Jacob is also kind enough to walk us through his personal investing journey and how his research over many years has been sewn together to create the RipeHouse platform. He gives us some insights into how the platform works.
I think people really have to challenge the status quo on that as well, because people think that they've found an information source or a research, or they grab onto it, and then they might see other researchers say the same thing, and they think, hey, my job's done here. An example I use is Moreton Bay. So Kalinga, 25 k's of Brisbane CBD. You draw a ring around the CBD. 25 k's is also Goodna in Ipswich. One has 8% supply in the pipeline and 4% population growth. So if you look at population growth and go, hey, wow, this is amazing. Kalinga is, everyone's moving there. It's all going in the right direction. They don't look at the other side of the curve and see that there's 8% of supply in the pipeline.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Jacob. Jacob Field, welcome to Smash Avo Property.
Thanks for having me, Jordan.
I'm rapt to get you on, mate. We've had a little bit of a back and forth and seen your business pop up every now and then, and very interested to delve into your story and speak a little bit about your business and what you're up to, and just filled out a survey that came through from you the other day, and you've produced a really nice COVID-19 report. So very interested to delve into your findings there and see what's coming through. But let's get us started. Why don't you talk a little bit about your background, about yourself, and when did you start investing? What was your investing journey like, and what is RipeHouse Advisory?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me on. It was an interesting process we've just gone through with the report, which I'm happy to go through in details today. But I'm always excited to, talk to other property investors, and maybe if what we've done on this side of the fence can help in some way, it'd be great to pass on some learnings. And I guess we're all in this together, so any learnings that we can share with each other are always useful. So, yeah, probably a little bit about myself. I've been investing in property since the early 2000s. So I was around 20 when I first bought my first property. Bought another one quite quickly. I then guess it was doing quite well. I thought this is pretty easy. Things were a lot easier for us back then with 103% LVRs. And cash flow positive wasn't usually a problem to find. So I continued buying and wanting to buy, moved to Sydney with my wife. I guess I built up a network online of other people in property, and we would talk back and forth. And when I got to Sydney and when I looked at the areas that I was wanting to buy again at that time, I lost my confidence pretty quickly. I guess the story I go back to is, I was working professionally at the time. I was looking through realestate.com during the week, found a great property in Mount Druitt. Went out there on the weekend, and it was like an alien landscape for me. I really couldn't grasp the suburb. One of the properties I looked at looked great online, great price, end of a quiet cul-de-sac, quite competitively priced for the street and the comparables, and got out there for the open home, and it was literally boarded up. There was a path worn into the grass. People were using it as a thoroughfare through to the local train station, right? So they knocked the back fence down, and they were walking through the property, literally in the open home, and I'm like, I hadn't really seen that before. I went back to the drawing board. It took me about 2 years before I purchased again.
Gosh.
I guess I'm quite analytical in the way I solve problems. So I started developing a framework to understand why people lived where they do, understand why they valued the properties that they live in the way that they did, and how they paid for it. Going forward to 2011, obviously I continued to purchase. That's when I founded RipeHouse, which is the extension of that personal framework into, software that other people can use to do their own research and due diligence. Fast forward through a few years, continued to buy. It wasn't until I bought my sixth property that I actually lived in one that I owned. So I was rent vesting for quite a few years, as we all sort of did. At one point in 2015, we had about 1,400 people who were using the software. So it was a subscription service. They'll jump on there, look for suburbs potentially in street and properties that were going to work for them. Probably, I'm sort of going into a little bit of detail here, Jordan, and please forgive me, but that was around the time where I did a bit of a deep dive into the actual properties that people were purchasing. And I thought we were doing a pretty good job with the research, and we were always trying to improve the research. 2015, we did a deep dive into the actual properties people were purchasing. And we realised that 2 in every 3 purchases, the mum and dads who were using our software were stuffing it up. I can't sugarcoat it, but we'll give them the suburb and they'll buy in the wrong streets. Or we'll give them the street and they'll buy the wrong type of property, which might be all their budget could allow. Or they'll think they got the suburb right, close enough's good enough, or they might not negotiate effectively, too much public housing in the street, etc. That's when we really looked at ourselves and thought, do we continue on this path or do we really change the way we work and help mums and dads with property? So, that's probably taking us through to RipeHouse Advisory and where we're at today.
Yeah, nice. And I love that you bring up the rent vesting because, it's all of a sudden become the most common topic and everyone's a rent vestor now, and it's apparently this millennial thing, but obviously it's been around for a little while and been implemented in a lot of people's journey, including yourself. So I love that you touch on that one. And interesting the journey that you've had from, your own personal experiences and analytically going through properties and what investments and what makes a property and building your business from that to where it is today. And so I know you talked a little bit about, you used to have sort of mum and dad investors. Do you still have mum and dad investors on the platform itself, or who is the sort of target market that would use it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess that was around the time. So 2015, we really did make the decision, do we keep evolving the software and improving it? Is it working? Is it solving the problem? Is it generating wealth through property? So, over the years, property had done sort of quite, good things for myself and my family. It gave us a lot of options to be able to take different paths in our life. We then sort of looked at, I like to test and measure things, Jordan, I guess. So we saw what the issue was. 2 in every 3 people weren't buying effectively. Maybe if we change the distribution of that, I guess. So maybe if we work with professionals in the industry, people who had a track record of generating wealth as well, can we work with them? So we actually started off looking, hey, do we become a buyer's agent? I looked at working with an experienced buyer's agent there. Was that the right journey? It sort of was quite quick to reveal itself to us that we're probably even perpetuating the problem, where I found at the time a lot of buyer's agents potentially, I called it the buyer's agent dilemma. They'd sit there in the office in Sydney. Sydney might not be the best place to invest at the time, but it's all they know. So they have a client walking in and they make that client's strategy and the outcomes that client trying to achieve, they shoehorn it into the Sydney market, which is their specialty, right? As opposed to saying, hey, why don't you go and talk to this buyer's agent in Brisbane or in Adelaide or in Perth? So we thought if we open up offices as a buyer's agent, maybe we're going to perpetuate that dilemma. Maybe if we work with a network of buyer's agents, it might, break things open a little bit. It might get our research into the hands of investors more sustainably. What we're concerned about as a research house is getting the value of our research into the hands of an investor time and time again. So we've sort of worked out that a distributed network of buyer's agents who focus in different areas, different types of clients, different strategies. That's the most, I guess, resilient way of getting that research across. So now we've got almost 80 buyer's agents in our network. RipeHouse Advisory assists them with their research, their reporting, and their asset selection and the inspections on the ground. Generally, we're working in around 50 to 60 different locations across the country, and we're active on the ground in those locations. So a buyer's agent will be sitting in their office in Sydney. Client brief is sort of higher yield, 400,000, some cosmetic renos. Sydney's not going to cut it. Okay, we help them buy for that client in Brisbane or in Adelaide or regional Victoria. So we're really perfecting the property outcome to a client brief and matching the two together.
That's awesome.
Go into a bit of detail, but yeah.
No, I love it. And that's part of the journey. That's part of the story and how you've developed the platform. And obviously, from those initial things that you identified as, key indicators of why people might live in a certain property or the areas and all that sort of stuff has changed over time as well. I mean, do you think it has changed over time, and how have you seen the platform and the algorithms and stuff like that work through that process?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I think in short, it hasn't really changed, and I'm sorry to disagree. As a company, we focus on, the guys that are part of our team are, have a background in more research or software, as opposed to marketing or sales or property, relationship management, etc. So we really do focus on the data, the research. Uh, but then our core algorithm for how to find high growth locations hasn't really changed since 2015 as well. Okay, so it does come down to supply and demand. But when I say that, it's like the stock market, right? So you can measure that by looking at yield and by volume. Okay, so the primary indicator for us is are rents increasing in line and accompanied by yields increasing, which means that prices are relatively stable. Typically, if all these positive things are happening in a location, train, infrastructure, employment, health, whatever it might be, people will rent first. They'll try to dip their toe in the water. If it's all going okay, they will then buy. So the first things that move, you have upwards pressure on rents, yields move. 6 months, 12 months after the leases expire, they start buying, sales volume starts spiking. If you have a limited or cap on supply, days on market will start dragging down, and then potentially the stars are aligning for growth. Right? That's human behaviour. That's repeated time and time again. We've obviously got more sophisticated with how we find those types of locations. We've got to get on the ground in those locations when the bell rings for us to do our on-the-ground due diligence. But yeah, that really hasn't changed with the amount that we spend on research and analytics. It's the same core.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it just comes down to those fundamentals of supply and demand, and the indicators that change those levels. So yeah, I can't see it changing over time, but yeah, it's definitely interesting to see that those same fundamentals still apply, and you probably see that over the 30-year economic growth period that we've just gone through, and that's been sustainable. Those calculations have been sustainable through that whole period, and really that's what defines an A-grade investment property is sticking to those foundations and fundamentals of where do people buy? Are people catching the train in that area? How close away is the train from that area? And all those base fundamentals, as you just said.
No, I was really just going to quickly add, I think people really have to challenge the status quo on that as well, because people think that they've found an information source or a researcher, they grab onto it, and then they might see other researchers say the same thing, and they think, hey, my job's done here. An example I use is Moreton Bay. So Kalinga, 25 k's to Brisbane CBD. You draw a ring around the CBD. 25 k's is also Goodna in Ipswich. One has 8% supply in the pipeline and 4% population growth. So if you look at population growth and go, hey, wow, this is amazing, Kalinga is, everyone's moving there. It's all going in the right direction. They don't look at the other side of the curve and see that there's 8% of supply in the pipeline. So these are current approvals set to be built in Kalinga. They fall in love with the university and, IKEA and Trainline Extension and Westfield and all the nice things happening in Moreton, but they forget about the supply that's coming in. And they forget about the 30,000 dwellings that are going to enter into the market just above Bracken Ridge and how that might impact travel into the city. And they rule out, Ipswich as an example, Goodna, what's the numbers? 2% supply in the pipeline, similar population pressure. So similar upwards pressure on population, 1/4 of the supply. And if you look at the same types of properties, 8 to 10 year, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 400, 450 in Kalinga, 300 to 350 in Goodna. On the train line, similar commute distance to Brisbane CBD. So that's just a really quick example of how to challenge the status quo. Obviously, Goodna is not as often spoken about as Kalinga, and potentially not as many buyers agents buying in Goodna as Kalinga. So it's just an interesting case study. I think something I always refer back to.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, along my journey, I've picked up on those little things too. I mean, you listen to podcasts and you hear all these tips and tricks of things that you should look out for that make a good investment property. But it's not until you look at everything on both sides of the spectrum in supply and demand and, how much land is available, how much can they build out, and understand everything from an overview point of view, do you realize, okay, well, maybe this area isn't the same as that area. And you can see that in certain places like, I grew up in Sydney, and my mum lived in
Yep.
Maroubra in Sydney, and it's, Maroubra is a great place, and it's only 10 minutes drive away from the airport. But if you think about Melbourne, where I am now, 10-minute drive away from Melbourne Airport is Broadmeadows, and obviously it doesn't have the beaches and everything else like that, so it's not the same sort of context. But if someone was to sell to you, oh, you got to be near the airport, then you got to look at the whole overview of everything that goes into what a investment property or an A-grade investment property is, and understand that. So I think you're spot on there. Yeah, yep. And let's get into the report now. I'm very keen.
Let's do it.
I had a great read of it, mate, and it was very insightful. But to get us started with it, I mean, there was definitely some tough questions in there, and you obviously were challenging some of the experts in the industry, which I love, and it's where you get the real good foundations. But I mean, what was the real objective of this report?
Yeah, I mean, I guess professionally we focus more on the property, I guess micro. So we would compare LGAs versus other LGAs and suburbs versus suburbs, but we generally take the approach that it's potentially not right now, but it's always a good time to buy property. Might not be a good time in Sydney, but it might be at the same time it might be a good time in Perth, etc. So we're always trying to compare apples and apples, and a lot of our people that we know in the industry, whether they're clients or not, were coming to us and saying, "Hey, what do you think about COVID-19 and how is it going to impact Australian property?" And it just wasn't something we were comfortable in giving an answer to. So I thought, well, look, the best way that we can gather some evidence and try and work through this problem that we're facing is to go out to everyone I know in the industry and ask their opinion in a structured way, I guess, and that's the important point, in a structured fashion. We actually had 146 respondents. So everyone from REI members and presidents through to well-known property faces, through to researchers, academics, economists, right through to property valuers, sales agents, buyers agents, people on the ground, property managers. It was a broad spectrum. I felt it wasn't so much the individual answers that were important, it was the group. The crowd is more likely to be accurate than the individual. And it was that group opinion that we wanted to really look for. And so then we were able to develop a report from that to answer those questions that we were fielding, day in and day out from our clients and contacts. So that was the reason behind it. And I thought it was definitely a useful exercise.
Oh, for sure. And there was definitely some big names in there. And I loved how you threw in, some of the quotes of some of the things that they said, and you get to actually understand their thinking and their thought process, not only just, numbers on a graph, but see what they're saying and how they feel the market's going through at the moment. And what were some of those key findings and insights that you found?
Probably the funny one, we're all in property very deep, so we throw around concepts and terms, and sometimes it loses its meaning a little bit. So I really like it when property is covered from a different perspective, whether it's the stock perspective. So fund manager, we had a wholesale fund manager respond. So the person who's sort of looking and making investment decisions for large sums of money into a commercial property space, being very bearish about how COVID-19. He was looking at it more in terms of the macro economy, where the debt cycle was, how it's probably lining up for a correction anyway. We've had an 11-year bull market, and then this is the thing that just really breaks the camel's back. So the fund manager, the sophisticated money managers, were quite bearish. Some of the people on the ground that are really, I guess, at an incident level, so a transactional level. One day looks pretty similar to the next for them. They really couldn't see they sort of saw what's in front of them and not seeing much difference. At least this was 2 weeks ago. They're still sort of selling properties. You've got some stuff turning over. Prices are relatively the same. So I found a lot of the more on the ground type opinions more short-sighted and potentially more bullish. Probably a couple of takeaways though. So as I said before, Maria Iannotti, who's an economist at the University of Tasmania, she really spoke about property in more of a market type framework in I guess a stock or a share market or equities type conversation. And she said it's not like any other market. It's going to be impacted. It's not going to be I guess escape it. And and probably her comments in a wider fashion were probably more broad, but it did sort of remind you that property is not this special exception to the rule. It's treated, markets are all driven by human emotion, and it's not going to be, I guess, removed from that. Dan Collins from REI WA and also Momentum Wealth. He's always someone who provides great insights and commentary. Here was a bit of a reality check, I guess. It might be, COVID-19 might change the way that we live and work in property forever. We might not go back. So high density concentrations of people we might be moving away from that as a culture. We might realise the consequences of it. So the Sydneys of the world might be less in vogue. The sea change, the tree change might be the direction that we head in. And obviously, a lot of comments coming through around the types of property people would be preferring. So home offices, larger spaces removed from homes, etc. I know I'm sort of sitting in my home office here, and the kids are sort of locked inside, away. We're able to have this conversation. But that space, so maybe moving further away from the city, more work from home. A common theme from respondents was, that bigger blocks with more options at home. Chris Gray was also, he's always interesting to go to comment for. He said it was too early to tell. 3 to 6 months. We're really not going to be able to see much change in property. We're only going to see that impact if they're, and I'm paraphrasing these answers, by the way, we're only going to see impact if people have to sell, and they don't have to yet.
Yep.
Okay, so he's reserving judgment. Does that probably sort of take a bit of a snapshot for you, or?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And I love the mixed bag that you did get through, and the different perspectives you can have. And in every format, they're right in some way, because they're all entitled to opinion. Working from home is now a predominant thing. We're all doing it, and people are realizing, well, I can actually do my 8-hour working day from home, and it's the same process. So is that going to change the market? And then Chris with his remarks, it is very early to tell what is going to happen. There's too much stimulus and repayment holidays and all that sort of stuff happening now to really see, if we're in lockdown for 18 months, what would the true impact be on the market? So I think, it's interesting to see all the different stories come out, and they're all right in some way. And that's, I guess, what you guys are trying to do is understand the sentiment as an overall sort of point of view, rather than just individuals who are on the ground or might be bullish or bearish in their own terms. So I love it, mate. And there's definitely some good results there. Specifically, there was a lot of talk about Airbnbs and stuff as well, and how that short-term rental market's now becoming long-term rental markets. And we actually run a couple of Airbnbs ourselves, and we've had to move back into one just because the whole market is slowed down completely. You know what I mean? And that's why I'm speaking to you from my garage at the moment. It's a self-made garage office, but that's
awesome.
That's the pain points that we've got to go through, and these are the things that happen. So it's definitely an interesting time. But what about the specific areas? Were there specific areas in the market or the property sector that they said would be impacted?
Yeah, look, I think what we're really interested in is we've got huge amounts of data. So we've got 750 gigabytes of property data. Okay, so RipeHouse as a company, we're a big data property company. We own all of our own data. We have been applying some pretty sophisticated algos to that data for a number of years now. We're very good at being able to sort of, I guess, dial up a thought process or an opinion and try and find the suburbs that are going to be most affected and try and quantify the impact on them. So that was the other large objective from the report, is to take, I guess, the wider view from these respondents, to distill it down and then to find those individual suburbs. So at a really high level, New South Wales was probably, by opinion, 79% of respondents said New South Wales is going to be mostly hardest hit. Property in lower socio or outer ring areas, obviously exposure to tourism, hospitality, and retail in whatever way, and obviously exposure to holiday homes and Airbnb. That were the major concepts that come out of the respondents. So we took that away. We designed some rules to try and find those areas that potentially we needed to avoid based on that. So we came up with a list of our avoid suburbs. Whether you're in them already, it's probably hard to avoid them, but potentially if you were looking at making an investment decision, you might think twice about it going forward for the next few months at least. So the first tranche of suburbs we found were those overly exposed to holiday or tourism. We sort of made the assumption that Airbnb would sort of capture the holiday homes or the beachside suburbs as well as the the Kingsford in New South Wales, which was very, at risk from our research, which has a lot of the tourist and the commercial stays. So,
Mm.
that particular study, we're looking at high Airbnb concentration. So 2.5% of all dwellings in a suburb or above. Spikes in the last few weeks of vacancy rates in the established rental market, and that's the assumption that Airbnbs will be put onto the traditional rental market and spike things up there. And then that's already transferring across into wholesale discounts in asking rents per week. That was a study that we went through to find. We also did another study for those suburbs that have a high concentration of retail, tourism, or hospitality as residents. They're already seeing those impacts on their rental health, vacancy, rent spiking. But yeah, I guess probably the silver lining we took out of it, we're looking for potential safe havens as well. And skipping forward to the positive, there are suburbs that potentially will be more insulated than others. Those were economies that we thought were more diverse, so have a larger spread of employment across a number of sectors, potentially have low supply in the pipeline. So we were making the assumption that population, net migration and population were going to basically be zero, so we're not getting any migrants from overseas, and the borders are closed even amongst states, so potentially people are not moving between states anymore, so for a while. So we basically turned population down, and I think we had a quick chat before this conversation, Jordan, and Moreton Bay popped up. Moreton Bay's got great population, lots of supply, lots of new dwellings, but great population growth. What happens when you turn population growth down to zero?
Yeah.
How are those locations going to stand up? So what we wanted to do is find those locations that have diverse employment, have low supply in the pipeline with little scope for more supply, and potentially new projects that are still going to go ahead. So assuming that mining, industrial, commercial, health, these types of projects in the pipeline are still going to go ahead, with suburbs potentially presenting themselves as safe havens. So it was an interesting sort of progression that we went through in that process.
Yeah, I love that. There's a ton there, and there's plenty to delve into. I mean, with the Airbnb story, I mean, we had someone reach out to us last night saying, "Hey, we've just lost our job. We're in the hospitality industry. Our tenant won't give us a discount on our rent. Can we stay at your Airbnb but at a discounted price?" So it's crazy to see like all of these little things and intricacies and things that are happening within the spaces themselves. Thank God we're not in a holiday destination. We sort of triggered the business travelers in some sort of way. So we're sort of in that sort of, in a 15-minute radius of the Melbourne CBD. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all these industries do impact each other and how they integrate moving forward as well.
And that's probably the distinction. I'm not, when I say a safe haven suburb, I'm not talking about growth here. I'm not, we have another separate set of suburbs that we would classify as high growth potential. I'm talking about these potentially will be insulated from the impacts of COVID-19. So I'm just sort of separating. This is not a podcast to go, hey, go and buy in these suburbs. When this type of thing happens, I guess we've got to really lower the risk to us in our portfolios and our investments, and safe havens provide that, but they might not provide the upside either.
Yeah, and I love that you touched on the population growth as well, because I was having a conversation to someone on one of my YouTube videos, and he was saying, well, how could the property market fall? We've got really good population growth, and all of these sort of core fundamentals, as we were saying before, that you generally would think would improve the prices of property. But as you say, population growth is split between natural increase and migration. And if you switch migration off, then all we've got is natural increase, and that's significantly lower than migration is. And,
Absolutely.
When you think about what natural increase is, well, it's just births and deaths. And obviously there's people that are going through the different age groups. But if we've only got natural increase right now as a population increase, right, we're only having people being born and people dying. But people that are going into that age bracket that they might decide to go out and rent or buy a property aren't doing that at the moment because we're in the middle of COVID-19. So we don't actually have that natural increase of population moving into the property sector. So as you say, it's pretty much zero.
I mean, you've got to make that assumption, and that's all we can really do at this point. But then also, how long, even if we were in lockdown now for the next 4 or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever it might be, tourism is going to be net migration. People are just not going to up and move to Queensland. You know what I mean? It's going to be I'm just speaking now out of opinion. That's going to be one of the last things to turn back on again. I think population is going to be, a handbrake on that. So you've got to look. A lot of the growth story around, say, Queensland as a state is around population and people moving to Queensland, and that's creating that scarcity. And when the population outsupplies or beats the supply, that's when you have the growth. That whole conversation now is over, until we can see that net migration is once again back on the table for Queensland. So for me, when we're talking at an advisory perspective, you're almost talking a whole state is now written off for investment purposes. And you compare that to South Australia. We've been actively buying in South Australia with clients for now 2 years, very heavily. Okay, so large distribution into South Australia. South Australia is traditionally a very low population growth environment. So you're hovering as a state around 1%, but you've still had tremendous growth there over time with low net migration. Okay, because incomes and employment, etc., are healthy. A lot of old money in Adelaide. So it might bring more bias more towards Adelaide as an investment destination because it has low population growth anyway. It's an interesting conversation. I'm probably just unpacking this now in front of you, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all sort of evolves.
Yeah, no, I love it, mate. I reckon I could talk to you all day about this sort of stuff as we talked for about an hour pre-podcast and thought, we may as well do the podcast now. But yeah, I love it, mate. And for people that want to go and read the report, where could they find it?
Yeah, so www.RipeHouse Advisory, so RIPE advisory.com.au, and then /COVID, so COVID. They're able to jump on there and view the report. It literally just dives straight into the PDF. So there's no email required. They just jump straight into that URL and view the PDF. It's about, look, there's a bit of content in there. I won't lie. Like, there's no point doing this type of thing if it's not hard hitting and it does dig into the concepts. But there's some takeaway quotes and things that you can digest pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'll leave a link in the show notes as well so people can find it there and just jump straight through. And beautiful. I mean, moving forward for you, I mean, what is the vision for RipeHouse? I mean, are you wanting to continue to do these sort of surveys and reports? Is that going to become a more common sort of thing, or what are you envisioning in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the exercise has been very positive. The transition of I guess sometimes there are components of what we're doing is going full circle. So we would like to connect a little bit closer with mums and dads again in what we're doing with research, etc. These types of pieces of content, the deep dives, we're in a unique position sometimes to commission them. And I think they do provide a nice outlet. So if they come and get their report, stay in touch, be a friend of RipeHouse Advisory. They can complete there's a web form on the page to get more information and to become involved. So we'll always be, I guess, probably trying to dig deeper into some of these concepts going forward.
Yeah, that's cool. Definitely keen to watch out for what's coming from you guys. This report's been fantastic, so keen to see what's coming through next. And what about your own investing journey? I mean, are you still going through asset selection? Have you wrapped up and heading into retirement? I mean, what does it look like for you moving forward?
Yeah, look, probably just at a really high level. I mean, personally, I've gone in a lot of different directions investing-wise. I've made a lot of mistakes. Went way too heavy into high-yielding regionals and had the house next door burned down. And, I get scared from whole postcodes calling me because I'm fearing that, it's the property manager telling me the bad news, I've generally probably oscillated too far from the average in whatever I've done. But the property's been pretty good to me. I made the decision I don't really need to continue working full-time like 5 years ago, or even probably a little bit longer. And had options, and obviously chose to continue in the property space and build out and help others with property. Moving forward, look, I'm probably pretty lazy now. I really don't like dealing with property managers, and I've sold down a lot of my assets that have caused issues with management. So I've got a very low LVR across the portfolio. I personally wouldn't do anything that wasn't a value add or a strong value add proposition. So look, there's a lot of interesting, probably the way to execute over the next 12 months will be through options, to be sort of locking up as much property as you can get hold of where you aren't exposed to the downside, but you're exposed to the upside. some really interesting propositions going around. So you've got to look at the sectors hardest hit, hotel to strata type conversions, higher density to lower density or value adds, some interesting prospects that we've identified personally in that sector. But I'd probably, going forward and outside COVID-19, look to de-risk, which is particularly relevant in this scenario through value adds. The faster you can get equity in that property, the less exposed you are to the downside. And the more, read sort of 20 years ago, for me, that was the light bulb that went off. Hey, property can be like a pyramid where, look, you buy one property, you can use that to buy 2 and 4. You can still do that, but de-risk the downside.
And, obviously you've alluded to some mistakes there and, things that you've done along your journey and people that you've learnt through and the building the business as you had. There's a lot of depth and context that have gone through your story and in your investing journey. But, if there was any final advice that you could pass on to young investors, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm obviously still on the journey and I guess hopefully relatively, early on in that journey still. So I'm only speaking from opinion. I'm sort of really not trying to come from a point of knowing everything, I guess. But yeah, obviously I've just sort of touched on it in this current environment, de-risking, getting to that path of equity as quickly as possible and potentially manufacturing some. So that means buying well, buying potentially under market, and it's obviously often overused term, but just looking at comparable analysis, making sure there's comfort there. You're not stepping out on the ledge and paying more than this property is worth. And if you can pick up something under what you feel is fair market value, you're de-risking things from your perspective, and the bank will come around to your side in 6 months with a reval. That always helps. Value add through cosmetic reno. I'm sort of talking 5 in this environment, 5-7% cosmetic reno. Just coming in, doing kitchen, bathroom, floating floors, repaint. That's going to add that 10 or 12% of value on that property and de-risk things for you and de-risk the downside. Above all, more often than not in the industry, things become too complicated, or you've got all these experts out there saying different things and it becomes a little bit confused. So just go back to logic and common sense. Don't fight against your gut feel. This is not difficult. Looking back across the properties that have done the best for me over time have just been the simplest but most basic purchases that people are just going to want to live in. There's lots of those because they're common for a reason. And look, there's no second chances in this environment either. So form a team. Don't be stingy in paying professionals to do things for you all the way through the property transaction, because they've done it before. You can rely on that. We can't afford a second chance is probably the one takeaway from COVID-19.
Yeah, perfect, mate. I love it. There's plenty of gold in that little nugget of a sentence that you gave me there, but it's perfect, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing a few little insights from the report and talking to us about your own journey and your path through your investing journey and your business too, mate. It's been a great conversation. So thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate Jacob coming on and sharing the insights they found in the COVID-19 versus Australian property report, alongside sharing his personal investing journey and the development of his platform. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey. Learn from the mistakes that we have made and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to jordandeong.com/podcasts, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. Also, if you want to see what else I'm up to, you can head over to my YouTube channel to see the latest. Just type Jordan de Jong into YouTube and I should pop up somewhere. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.